Through the late 18th century and into the early 19th century, slavery is thriving in the British West Indian colonies, in the French West Indies as well. The production of sugar is a terrifically lucrative commodity production, and slave plantations in the West Indies are known to be terrifically grueling, deadly places. Most British and European slaveholders in the West Indies purchase enslaved men primarily with the intention of working them to death. It's cheaper to purchase a young man and work him to death than it is to invest in sustaining the life and communities of enslaved men and women and enslaved communities on West Indian sugar plantations.
The rebellion in Saint Domingue, or Haiti, in 1791 had a huge impact on the Atlantic world and had an imprint on slave owners throughout America. And that was, to them, that a French abolitionist group called the Amis de Noir, the Friends of the Blacks, had actually caused the slaves in Saint-Domingue to rise up against their masters. The result being that the plantation system there was decimated, whites were killed or expelled. And to slave owners, this presented the danger of abolitionist agitation infiltrating slave societies. It would destroy them. And so in the South, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, slave owners look at Haiti as what could happen. This is what could go wrong.
There's an early anti-slavery or abolition movement that begins in England in the mid to late 18th century. And its first goal is not the abolition of slavery per se, but the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. The argument is that the transatlantic slave trade, this trafficking in human captives, is so cruel and so inhumane that it must be brought to an end before the subject of abolishing slavery is tackled. In the early American nation, in the years after the Revolution, there's a fairly lively debate about the future of slavery in the United States. And while it becomes clear that the institution of slavery will endure, there's also a sense, for a number of reasons, economic, social, and international, that the United States will eventually end its participation in the transatlantic slave trade. That decision is governed by economic interests, that is, slaveholders in some of the upper South states are concerned that the continued importation of slaves will decrease the value of the enslaved people that are already owned in the United States. There's also a sense that ending U.S. participation in the transatlantic slave trade will bring the United States more in line with the growing anti-slavery movement in England. So there's a humanitarian impulse as well as an economic and social impulse.
And beginning in 1804, again, there's this big campaign in both England and in the United States trying to pressure Congress and Parliament to limit and ban the slave trade. And ultimately, both nations passed laws in the same month, March of 1807, prohibiting the importation of slaves. The American law of 1807 banning the slave trade goes into effect on January 1st, 1808, no longer allowed to bring slaves into the United States. And the British law, also passed in March 1807, it kind of takes effect gradually. It begins in May 1807, but doesn't really go into effect until March 1808. But by March of 1808, both England and the United States have fully prohibited the slave trade. However, the Spanish and the Portuguese are continuing it, and after 1808, another 3 million slaves are brought from Africa into places like Brazil and Cuba, mostly by Portuguese and Spanish slave traders, but also by a lot of American slave traders who are violating the U.S. law against this.